everybody, and welcome back to another episode. We're going to be talking about the kings. We're going to continue on that um, strain that we were talking about all the kings from King David down, northern and southern kingdom, but now we're still in the northern kingdom. Last time, I believe we left off in King Abijah, I think it was King Abijah, King Asa, King Jehoshaphat, and King Jehoram. Tonight, we are going to be going through King Ahaziah, King Athaliah, and King Joash. So thank you for tuning in as always. I do appreciate your time. I am always grateful and always thankful that you take time to listen. I mean, we don't have in these days a lot of time to dedicate to a half an hour or 45 minutes. So we're going to jump right into it. We're going to start with the King Ahaziah. Ahaziah was the king of Judah, the southern kingdom of Israel, and his reign would be recorded in 2 Kings chapter 8 verses 25 through 29 and 2 Chronicles chapter 22 verses 1 through 9. He was, as you know, the son of King Jehoram. Some would say Jehoram of Judah, and his wife Athaliah, the daughter of the wicked king Ahab of Israel and Jezebel. Ahiah's brief reign lasted only 1 year, and it was marked by tragic choices, political alliances with Israel, and a rather swift and untimely death, definitely not planned by him. When we look at his background, Ahaziah succeeded his father, who died a painful death as a judgment for his idolatry and wickedness, which was recorded in 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 18 through 20. Jehoram had been a rather wicked king, and Ahaziah continued in the same path as his father, influenced by his mother, a daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, who brought with her the idolatrous worship of Baal into Judah. In 2 Kings chapter 8, verses 25 through 26, it says that Ahaziah was 22 years old when he began his reign, and he reigned for that 1 year, as I previously said, in Jerusalem. This short reign was marked, surprisingly in such a short period of time, by a lack of positive spiritual leadership. Ahaziah's youthful age and his mother's influence led him to make alliances with Israel, further solidifying Judah's entanglement in the sinful practices of the northern kingdom. When we look at Ahaziah's wickedness and alliance with Israel, it's interesting that so much damage could be done in 1 year. In 2 Kings chapter 8 verses 27 and 2 Chronicles chapter 22 verses 3 and 4, it describes how Ahaziah walked in the way of the house of Ahab and did evil in the sight of the Lord, following the same path of idolatry and disobedience as Ahab and his descendants. His mother was a powerful figure behind the throne, and it is clear that she influenced Ahaziah's actions, guiding him away from the worship of God and towards Baal worship, which was a major sin in Israel and Judah during this period. Ahaziah allied himself with Jehoram of Israel, the son of Ahab, and together they fought against Hazael, king of Syria, which happened in 2 Kings 8, 28 and 29. This alliance was politically motivated, as both kingdoms faced common enemies, but it also led to greater sin and disobedience to God. It was a fatal political decision for Ahaziah. In 2 Kings chapter 9, verses 27 through 29, it would record the circumstances of Ahaziah's death after Jehoram of Israel was wounded in a battle against Hazael in 2 Kings. He retreated to Jezreel to recover. Ahaziah went to visit him in Jezreel, where he unwittingly found himself caught up in the judgment that God had pronounced upon Ahab's house. While Jehoram of Israel was in Jezreel, Jehu, the newly anointed king of Israel, executed God's judgment on the house of Ahab. Jehu was anointed by the prophet Elisha to destroy the house of Ahab due to their wickedness, especially their worship of Baal and their persecution of God's prophets. When Jehu arrived in Jezreel, Ahaziah was with Jehoram, and Jehu ordered his soldiers to kill Ahaziah. Ahaziah fled, but was wounded by Jehu's men, and he eventually died in Megiddo, where he was brought to be buried. This marks the tragic end of Ahaziah's brief and sinful reign. His death was a fulfillment of God's judgment on the house of Ahab, as his death was part of the greater purging of Baal worship from Israel and Judah. 2 Kings chapter 9, verse 29, it notes that Ahaziah's death did not bring much sorrow or mourning. His body was taken to Jerusalem and buried, but the Bible records that he was buried in the city of David because he is the son of Jehoshaphat, who sought the Lord with all his heart. This reflects a sad contrast between Ahaziah and his righteous ancestors, such as his great-grandfather, Jehoshaphat, who had sought the Lord. His death marked the end of the Davidic dynasty's direct line to the sons of Jehoram, his father. The throne of Judah then passed to his mother, who would later seize power in a violent coup and reign as queen for several years, even attempting to destroy the entire Davidic line, which is covered in 2 Kings chapter 11. Ahaziah's reign highlights the impact of parental and familial influence. While his great-grandfather Jehoshaphat had been a godly king, his mother led him astray into wickedness. Ahaziah's alliance with the house of Ahab, which was rooted in idolatry, sealed his spiritual downfall. The Bible makes it clear that sinful alliances, especially when they promote idolatry and turn their heart away from God, can bring great spiritual consequences, even for a king. Ahaziah's brief reign and his alliance with the house of Ahab led to judgment. His death at the hands of Jehu was part of God's judgment on the wicked dynasty of Ahab, but it also reflected the broader theme in the Bible that God does not tolerate idolatry and disobedience. Despite Ahaziah's brief time on the throne, his death is a vivid reminder that God's judgment is sure, and it can come swiftly, even on those in positions of power. Ahaziah's failure as a leader reflects the importance of spiritual commitment and leadership. King Jehoshaphat, his grandfather, was a good king who sought the Lord. But Ahaziah's failure to continue in the ways of his godly forebears resulted in disaster. A leader who ignores God's commandments and aligns with evil will ultimately face judgment. Leaders have a responsibility not only to lead their people politically, but also spiritually in that time frame. Throughout Ahaziah's life, the prophets of God, such as Elisha, were active in bringing God's message, even though Ahaziah did not listen. Jehu, anointed by Elisha, was God's instrument of judgment, and even though Ahaziah sought to avoid Jehu's wrath, he could not escape God's will. Now we're going to move on to no longer a king, but a queen, Queen Athaliah. Athaliah is one of the most notorious and wicked figures in the Bible. She was the daughter, as I said before, of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel of Israel. And she became the queen of Judah by marrying Joram. The king of Judah. Athaliah's reign and her actions in the Bible are primarily recorded in 2 Kings chapter 8, 2 Kings chapter 9, and 2 Chronicles chapter 21. Also briefly in chapter 22, or chapter 12, sorry. Athaliah's life and actions reflect themes of power, idolatry, violence, and the consequences of defying God's plan. As a figure, she stands out as one of the few women in the Bible who exercised significant political power. Yet her reign was characterized by treachery, bloodshed, and a relentless pursuit of her own ambitions. When we look at her family line that's covered in 2 Kings chapter 8 and 2 Chronicles chapter 21, Athaliah was the daughter of King Ahab of Israel with Queen Jezebel, both of whom were infamous in their way for their promotion of Baal worship and their persecution of God's prophets. Athaliah was raised in a wicked, idolatrous environment, and her parents, their influence over her life is reflected in her actions as queen. In 2 Kings chapter 8 and 2 Chronicles chapter 21, we see that Athaliah was married to Jehoram. Again, I ask for your grace when it comes to pronouncing names. I've never been too wonderful at pronouncing some of the Old Testament names. Anyway, she was married to Jehoram, the king of Judah, in a political alliance designed to strengthen ties between the northern kingdom of Israel, ruled by Ahab's family, and the southern kingdom of Judah. This marriage was part of a broader trend where royal families sought to consolidate power through alliances, which we see throughout history. However, this union also introduced idolatry and wickedness into Judah. As Athaliah brought the pagan worship practices of her family into the royal court, leading her husband and the people of Judah further away from God. In 2 Kings chapter 8, 18 and 19, and 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verses 6 through 10, Athaliah's influence on her husband Jehoram was significant, very significant. Jehoram followed the wicked ways of the house of Ahab, and together they led Judah into further idolatry. Athaliah's presence likely contributed to Jehoram's decision to build altars for Baal and worship false gods, which was one of the reasons for God's judgment on Jehoram's reign. And then he was eventually struck down by a debilitating disease, and he died. One could say that Queen Athaliah had a murderous reign. After the death of her husband, Athaliah's son Ahaziah took the throne of Judah like his father. Ahaziah was wicked and followed the ways of his grandfather, as we mentioned before, Ahab. However, Ahaziah's reign has only lasted 1 year, and he was killed in battle when Jehu, the anointed king of Israel. And then Jehu's violent purge of Ahab's house extended to Ahaziah, who was caught in the bloodshed that God had ordained as judgment for Ahab's idolatry and wickedness. After the death of Ahaziah, Athaliah saw an opportunity to seize power. She orchestrated a coup and ordered the massacre of all of Ahaziah's sons, intending to wipe out the entire Davidic line and secure her own reign. This was a desperate and ruthless act of political ambition. However, Joash, one of Ahaziah's sons, a baby at the time, was hidden away by Jehoiada, the high priest, and his wife, Jehosheba to protect him from Athaliah's murderous reign and her murderous schemes. 2 Kings chapter 11 states that Jehosheba, the daughter of King Jehoram, Athaliah's husband and sister of Ahaziah, secretly took Joash and hid him in the temple for 6 years. During this time, Athaliah ruled as queen, unaware that the true heir to the throne was alive. After 6 years of Athaliah's reign, Jehoiada the high priest organized a revolt against her. He gathered the captains of the guard at that time, the Levites, and the people of Judah to anoint Joash as king. When Athaliah heard the shouts of the people proclaiming Joash as king in the temple, she came to the temple to investigate. And upon seeing the young king, she cried out treason. But it was too late. In 2 Kings chapter 11, verse 15, it records that Jehoiada ordered her to be executed outside the temple, away from the sanctuary, to prevent the desecration of the holy place. Athaliah was killed, and Joash was officially crowned king of Judah. Her violent end was a direct result of her wickedness and her attempt to destroy the royal line of David. Athaliah's death marked the end of her tyrannical rule. After her execution, the temple of Baal was demolished, and the worship of the Lord was restored at the reign of Joash. This event marked a key moment in the ongoing battle between the worship of God and the idolatry promoted by the house of Ahab, which had heavily influenced Judah through Athaliah. Some of the things we can learn, or lessons we can learn from Athaliah's life, one being the dangers of idolatry and having wicked alliances. Because Athaliah's life is a stark warning about the dangers of idolatry and ungodly alliances. Her marriage to Jehoram, an alliance between the house of Ahab and the house of David, led Judah into idolatry, which is repeatedly condemned in the Bible. Idolatry and wickedness often often have far-reaching consequences, as seen in how Athaliah's actions brought about bloodshed and the near destruction of the Davidic line. Athaliah's ruthlessness and ambition reflect the power of sin when it is allowed to grow unchecked. She was willing to murder her own grandchildren to secure her power. That is displaying a level of cruelty and heartlessness that is rare. Even in the annals of the Bible and its darker stories, and life itself. Her willingness to kill the rightful heirs to the throne is a tragic example of how sin and ambition and idolatry can lead a person to commit unimaginable evil. Despite Athaliah's efforts to destroy the Davidic line and her reign of terror, God's power was not thwarted. It never is. Joash was preserved by God through the efforts of Jehosheba and Jehoiada. God's promises to David that his descendants would rule on the throne of Judah were protected, and the rightful king was restored to the throne. This demonstrates God's faithfulness to his covenant, even in the face of human treachery. Athaliah is one of the few women in Scripture who took a ruling position in Israel or Judah, and she is remembered for her evil and violent leadership. Her story highlights how leadership, regardless of gender, can either be a force of righteousness or a means for evil, depending on the character and values of the ruler. Athaliah's actions serve as a cautionary tale about how power can corrupt, and how even those in positions of influence can lead others into ruin if they reject God's ways. So we see that Athaliah's life and reign serve as a reminder of the dangers of idolatry, ambition, and ruthless power. Her actions, driven by her desire to hold on to the throne, led her to commit atrocious acts, including the murder of her own grandchildren. Yet in the end, her wickedness would and could not thwart God's plan. Her death marked the restoration of the Davidic line, and Joash and his reign became the fulfillment of God's promise to David. And now we get into King Joash. He was also known as Jehoash. I'm going to say Joash, I think, because it's a little easier for me to pronounce. After all, I ain't no fancy scholar. But Joash was the king of Judah who reigned for 40 years in Jerusalem. His story is primarily recorded in 2 Kings chapter 11 through 13 and 2 Chronicles chapter 22 through 24. Joash's reign is notable for both spiritual reform and tragic decline. He started as a young and righteous king, but his later years were marked by spiritual neglect and idolatry. Idolatry, man, it takes you down every time, doesn't it? Joash's life offers valuable lessons on the impact of leadership, the influence of mentors, and the dangers of forsaking God after an initial period of faithfulness. Got to stay on that path. So let's look at his background slightly. Even though we touched upon it already, we'll retouch upon it. And Joash was the son of Ahaziah, the king of Judah, and his grandfather was Athaliah. I meant to say grandmother, who had seized the throne after the death of her son. Athaliah's reign was marked by wickedness and an attempt to exterminate the Davidic line. And when Ahaziah died, she killed all of his children in a bid to secure her power. And after 6 years of hiding, protected, Joash was proclaimed king at the age of 7. The high priest Jehoiada was a significant spiritual mentor for Joash. Under Jehoiada's guidance, Joash was able to follow the ways of the Lord. Jehoiada not only protected Joash, but also ensured that Judah would return to worshiping the true God, the one true God, after the idolatrous reign of Athaliah. One of Joash's first major acts, covered in 2 Kings 12, 2 Chronicles 24, when he was in the temple or restoring the temple. But one of his first acts as king was the restoration of the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, which had been neglected and fallen into disrepair during the reign of his grandmother. Joash, guided by Jehoiada, ordered a collection to be taken from the people of Judah to fund the restoration project. Jehoiada, the priest, led this work, and it said that the repairs were made with great care, and the work prospered in 2 Chronicles chapter 24. The restoration of the temple symbolized a spiritual renewal in Judah under Joash's reign. Another important act of reform was the renewal of the covenant between God and Judah. Joash and the people of Judah re-entered into a covenant to serve the Lord and to forsake idolatry. Jehoiada also helped restore the Levites to their roles in the temple and ensured that the priesthood would function according to God's law. During the years of Jehoiada's leadership, Joash followed God faithfully. The kingdom of Judah was spiritually renewed, and Judah's worship practices were restored to align with God's commands. This was a time of spiritual revival and national stability. Jehoiada's death, and led to a bit of Joash's turn to idolatry in 2 Chronicles chapter 24. After the death of Jehoiada at the age of 130, I don't know that I could make it to 130, Joash's leadership began to decline. The Bible notes that when Jehoiada died, Joash was influenced by the princes of Judah. They led him astray and caused him to forsake the Lord. The spiritual decline came quickly. Joash began to listen to the counsel of the people who did not fear God, and he abandoned the reforms instituted by Jehoiada. After Jehoiada's death, Joash forsook the worship of the Lord and allowed the people of Judah to revert to idol worship, including the worship of the Asherah poles and other pagan practices. If you've listened to my Christmas videos and all that kind of stuff, I cover those exact things. Joash's failures to remove these idols led to the anger of the Lord. The prophet Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, confronted the king about his apostasy and the people's sin. But Joash responded by having Zechariah stoned to death. I guess that was the early form of excommunication, or banning people from your platform. Zechariah's martyrdom was a turning point in Joash's reign, as it signified his rejection of God's warnings. In 2 Kings chapter 12 and 2 Chronicles chapter 24, it covers the defeat by Ahaziah of Syria. As a result of Joash's disobedience and abandonment of God, Judah suffered military defeat. Ahaziah, the king of Syria, attacked Judah and took much of its treasure, including the sacred golden vessels from the temple. The loss of these treasures was a sign of God's judgment on Joash for forsaking him. Eventually, Joash was assassinated by his own servants. His servants conspired against him, probably because of his apostasy and the blood of Zechariah that he had shed. He was struck down in his bed, and his son Ahaziah succeeded him as king. Joash's death was a tragic end to a life that had started with great promise and spiritual zeal, but ended in spiritual decay and murder. He was buried in the city of David, but not in the tombs of the kings, a sign of his disgrace. Joash's story underscores the rather profound impact of godly leadership on the spiritual health of a nation. During the reign of Jehoiada, Joash was faithful to God and saw spiritual renewal in Judah. But after Jehoiada's death, Joash's own faithfulness faltered. His decline illustrates the danger of a lack of spiritual guidance and the need for constant commitment to God. It also highlights the critical role of mentors and leaders in maintaining faithfulness. Joash's turn to idolatry and rejection of the prophets demonstrates the danger of spiritual backsliding. Despite his early reforms, Joash allowed the influence of ungodly advisors to lead him away from the worship of God. His failure to listen to the warnings of God's prophets, especially the martyrdom of Zechariah, was the ultimate sign of his apostasy. Joash's life is a reminder that while God is faithful and willing to bless those who walk in obedience, there are consequences for forsaking God. Joash's initial reforms were rewarded, but his later disobedience led to judgment, both in military defeat and personal betrayal. His reign shows that God's patience has limits, and the consequences of forsaking God can be severe. So, despite a promising start, Joash's life ended tragically. His life serves as another cautionary tale that the end of one's life is sometimes more important than the beginning. And Joash had the opportunity for greatness, but chose idolatry and pride, which led to his downfall. Joash's reign was a tale of contrasts, beginning with a period of spiritual renewal and righteous leadership under Jehoiada, but ending in idolatry, apostasy, and betrayal. This story serves, and his life serves, as another, as I said before, cautionary tale about the importance of faithfulness to God, the danger of abandoning his ways, and the long lasting consequences of turning away from God. Joash's life is a vivid reminder that even those who begin well can fall if they do not remain faithful to God throughout their lives. Again, thank you for listening to me this evening. I do consider it an honor and a blessing that you're here to listen. I'm always grateful and thankful. And with that, I'll say good night and have a beautiful day.